I wanted peace and quiet, a break from the city to find inspiration for my novel. So I booked a remote cabin in the woods. It looked old and worn down, but it felt perfect. I got there a few weeks ago, excited and ready. I set up my laptop and began writing. At first, everything was fine, just me in the cabin, but on my first night I heard scratching. It was soft at first, tapping against the walls. I thought it was branches or maybe a raccoon. I brushed it off and tried to focus, but the scratching kept going. It pulled at my nerves. I got up a few times to check, but there was nothing. I felt foolish for getting spooked. Maybe I was just too focused on my work. As night turned into day, the scratching changed. I started to hear whispers. They seemed so faint. At first I thought I was imagining it. Then the whispers began to call my name. "Mia," they said softly. I couldn't shake the chill that ran down my spine. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just tired. But as the days went by, the noises got louder. The whispers became more clear. I found notes left behind by previous visitors. Some talked about strange feelings and shadows outside the windows. Each note made me feel more uneasy. I became drawn into their words. I felt like something shifted in the cabin. A strange heaviness surrounded me. I felt watched. That evening, I sat at my laptop with the curtains drawn tight. I glanced outside and saw the trees. They looked like dark fingers reaching toward me. My heart raced. The whispers returned. "Mia!" they called again, clearer this time. I felt cold. I had been alone many times before, but this was different. I wanted to leave, but something kept me there. I froze, unsure of why I'd stay. As dusk fell, I heard footsteps outside. They were slow and deliberate. I looked but saw nothing. It was unsettling. Then I heard a voice. It was closer than before. "Mia!" My breath caught in my throat. I turned, panic rising inside me. Everything went quiet then. The whispers stopped. The tension in the air thickened. I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I stood there, frozen, heart pounding in my chest. Something told me I wasn't alone anymore. I don't know what I felt that night. Perhaps something followed me home. I remember that last moment clearly, the silence that filled the cabin and the weight of eyes watching me from the dark. I never finished my novel. That weekend changed everything. I haven't gone back since. 2 weeks had passed since I left the cabin. I tried to forget everything that happened, but that wasn't easy. My dreams were haunted by whispers, shadows, and the feeling of being watched. I struggled to write anything worthwhile. My mind was a fog of fear and confusion. I decided maybe talking about it would help. So I reached out to my friend Ellie. She was practical, always grounding me when I got too anxious. I hoped she could help me untangle the mess in my head. When I shared my experience over coffee, her expression shifted. "You need to go back," she said simply. "Face it. Find out what really happened." I couldn't believe what I heard. "Ellie, I can't," I replied, my voice shaky. "What if something is really there?" It felt alive. She took a deep breath, her eyes serious. "You won't know until you go back. Just take someone with you." Her words stayed with me long after we parted. I thought about it a lot. Finally, I texted my brother, Jake. He was adventurous, always up for a challenge. After some convincing, he agreed to come with me. We set off on a cool autumn day. The drive was mostly quiet. I focused on the landscape flying past us, but I felt the weight of dread building in my stomach. I ached for comfort. I didn't want to face what lingered in that cabin again. When we arrived, the cabin loomed before us just as I remembered. I felt a shiver creep up my spine. Jake parked the car and we climbed out. "Ready?" he asked, glancing between me and the door. My heart raced. "Let's get this over with," I said, forcing a smile. As we stepped inside, the familiar scent of musty wood filled the air. A chill clung to the corners. I pointed out the notes I had found before, hoping to give Jake an understanding of the atmosphere. He read through them, his eyebrows knitting together with concern. We unpacked, and I tried to appear calm, but as night approached, anxiety settled in my chest. I could hear the leaves rustling outside, the sound creeping into my ears. I glanced at the window, half expecting to see eyes staring back at me, but there was nothing, just darkness. Later, as we settled in, I heard a familiar sound, scratching. It started softly, just like before. I exchanged a worried look with Jake. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his expression serious. "What is it?" I shook my head, unsure. Then came the whispers. They flowed through the air like cold smoke. "Mia!" they called, pulling me toward the darkness again. Panic shot through me. I felt trapped. Jake stood up. "I'm going to check outside," he said, determination in his voice. I grabbed his arm. "Don't! It's not safe!" But something in his eyes told me he needed to confront this too. As he opened the door, a gust of wind rushed in, scattering papers around the cabin. My heart raced. "Jake!" I called, but he stepped outside and the door slammed shut behind him. I was left alone, the whispering intensifying, echoing off the walls. Then I heard something worse. Footsteps, heavy and slow, coming from the woods. My breath caught again. Just then I noticed a figure moving among the trees. That's when I saw it. The outline of something lurking, watching me through the darkness. Panic rose like bile in my throat. "Jake!" I screamed, my voice trembling. But the only reply was the ever-encroaching silence. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows danced around me, deepening the sense of dread. "Jake!" I shouted again, panic fueling my voice, but only silence answered. Then the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a vicious wind. "Mia, come outside!" They called me softly, like a lover's promise turned sinister. I pressed my back against the wall, feeling the wood's cold surface against my skin. What was out there? I couldn't help but picture those eyes from my dreams. Still trembling, I took a hesitant step toward the door. There has to be a reason Jake went out, I thought. My mind raced through every moment from when I first arrived. I needed answers. If something was out there, I couldn't just sit and wait. I would face whatever darkness awaited me. Wiping my palms on my jeans, I finally opened the door. The wind gusted past me, nearly slamming it shut. I stepped out into the night, the air heavy with moisture. The forest was thick and black, the trees towering ominously over me. "Jake," I called quietly, hoping he wouldn't be far. The path looked different now, swallowed by shadows. I couldn't see where he'd gone. I heard rustling in the bushes and I spun, heart racing. "It's only the wind," I whispered, trying to calm myself. But then I felt it. That sensation of being watched intensified. A chill swept through the air. I took a deep breath and decided to move forward, trying to remember the way to the clearing where I had first seen the figure. Each step felt heavy. I strained my eyes, desperate to catch sight of Jake's silhouette or hear him call back. Nothing. Then I heard it again, the sound of footsteps. Not my brother's hurried steps, but something slower, deliberate. My pulse quickened. The whispers joined in as if encouraging whatever it was in the woods. "Mia, come." There, just a few feet ahead, I caught a glimpse of a shift in the darkness. Something pale glimmered against the bark of a tree. I squinted, trying to make sense of the shape. Then it shifted, an arm or a branch. I couldn't tell. "Jake," I called, stepping closer. My heart threatened to burst from my chest, each beat echoing my mounting dread. The whispers turned frantic now, overlapping in a chaotic blend. "Mia, come home!" I finally stumbled into the clearing, breathless and wide-eyed. Moonlight broke through the trees, illuminating a figure standing eerily still at the far edge. It looked like a man, or at least a twisted reflection of one. I felt blood drain from my face. "Jake!" I yelled, panic rising again, but as I squinted to get a better view, the figure began to dissolve into the shadows, melting back into the woods. "Where are you?" I shouted, feeling the urgency building. I needed to find Jake before whatever that was came back. I turned to search the other side of the clearing when suddenly a familiar voice cut through the dark. "Mia!" I whipped around, half relieved, half terrified. Jake stumbled out of the shadows, breathing heavily. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his eyes wild. "I thought I saw someone," I gasped, pointing back toward where the figure had stood. "That's not possible," he said, shaking his head. "I didn't see anyone." A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "We need to get back to the cabin." But just as we started to move, that voice returned, echoing from the depths of the woods, calling to me once more. "Mia, come home." And I realized, with a sinking dread, that something had followed us after all. I felt my stomach drop as the whisper sliced through the air again. "Mia, come home." It was so persistent, like a melody I couldn't escape. Jake noticed my panic and grabbed my arm, his grip firm but trembling. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure from before emerging from the trees. Jake frowned, looking uncertain. "It's just the wind. We need to move." But my feet felt glued to the ground. "What if— Mia now?" He pulled me away from the clearing, and I found myself running beside him, trying not to stumble over roots and rocks. My mind raced. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind us, just out of sight. We rushed through the darkness, Jake leading the way. The trees pressed in around us, their branches swaying like skeletal fingers. The whispers faded slightly, but the tension only grew. I could still feel those eyes watching us. "Do you think it's following us?" I asked, breathless, trying to keep pace. He glanced back, fear flickering in his eyes. "I don't know. We just need to stay together." As we reached the edge of the clearing, the ground turned marshy underfoot. The moonlight cast long shadows, occasionally tricking my eyes into thinking I saw movement in the darker patches. I shivered, my heart pounding harder than before. It felt like we were in a nightmare that refused to end. Then, just as I thought we were clear, I heard something snap behind us. It was a loud crack, like a branch breaking underfoot, and panic surged through me. "Run!" Jake shouted. I didn't need telling twice. We sprinted forward, the cabin finally coming into view. I thought we were safe, but when we reached the door, it stood ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. My heart sank. "Did you leave it open?" I asked, eyes darting around for whatever might be lurking in the trees. "No, I locked it," he said, his voice tense. A look of realization crossed his face. "What if someone's inside?" I felt a chill creep up my spine. "We can't go in there. What if it's waiting for us?" But we had no choice. The whispers were back, growing louder, harmonizing into a chilling chorus. "Mia, come home." With a deep breath, Jake pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. I followed, clenching his arm. The cabin felt different. It was darker, as if the shadows had thickened, wrapping around every corner. The air was heavy with an unsettling silence, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath us. "Check the windows," Jake ordered, moving toward the back of the room. "We need to be sure no one's here." I nodded and turned toward the windows, trying to glimpse anything outside. That's when I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the tree line, partially obscured by shadows but unmistakably watching us. My breath caught in my throat. It was the same form, the same eerie presence. "Mia!" Jake's voice pulled me from my trance. "Look!" I turned and my heart dropped. The cabin's door was slowly closing, not by any force of our own, but as though something was pushing against it from the outside. "Get it open!" I screamed, rushing back to the door, but it was locked tight. The whispers intensified, rattling my sanity. "Mia, come home." Jake and I exchanged frantic glances as something began to rattle the door from the outside. I knew then that whatever had followed us wasn't just a figment of our imagination. It was real, and it was coming for us. I felt Jake's grip on my arm tighten as the noise at the door grew louder. Whatever was outside pounded against it, sending vibrations through the wood. The fear in his eyes matched my own, and I could feel my breath coming quicker, mixing with the panic that surged in the cabin. "Mia, we need to move," he urged, his voice strained. I didn't want to leave the door, but the rattling was relentless. I turned and saw the small window behind me, barely lit by the moonlight. "There!" I shouted, pointing. "We can escape through the window." Jake cursed under his breath, but nodded. He rushed toward the window, and I followed, throwing glances back at the door. The whispers were now a cacophony, seemingly coming from everywhere. My heart raced, drowning out the words I could make out, except for my name. "Mia, come home!" It taunted me like a sinister lullaby. Jake pressed his hands against the window, forcing it open, but it was stuck. "Come on!" he shouted, panic seeping into his voice. He shoved harder, and I joined him, our combined strength finally breaking it free. He climbed out first, landing with a soft thud on the ground outside. I hesitated, taking one last look back at the door. The noises were growing more frenzied, desperate. "Mia!" Jake called from below, urgency flooding his tone. I couldn't wait. I squeezed through the window and tumbled onto the ground next to him. The chill of the night air hit me like a wave, but I barely felt it. I was too consumed by terror. "Which way?" I panted, looking around at the overwhelming darkness. The trees loomed like shadows, their branches swaying ominously. "Over here!" Jake grabbed my hand and pulled me toward a twisted path that wound back into the depths of the forest. I followed, trying to focus on his footsteps and not the feeling of being watched. As we hurried deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake the sensation that something sinister lingered just behind us. The branches snapped and crackled in the distance, the whispers still echoing in the back of my mind. I could almost hear the figure's breath, rhythmic and cold. "Do you think it's following us?" I dared to ask through ragged breaths. The darkness felt oppressive, closing in around me. Jake's face was pale as he shrugged. "I don't know, Mia, just focus. We need to find a place to hide." We stumbled upon a small clearing, moonlight spilling over the ground like liquid silver. I could see the trees almost dancing around us, their movements feeling oddly alive. Jake dropped to his knees, pressing his back against a sturdy tree. "Over here!" he whispered urgently. I crouched beside him, my eyes scanning the perimeter, the feeling of dread only amplified. That's when I noticed something on the ground, a small wooden box, half buried in leaves. Curiosity mixed with anxiety as I lifted it, wiping dirt off the lid. "What's that?" Jake asked, peering over my shoulder. I hesitated, feeling a rush of foreboding. "I don't know, but it feels strange." Just then the whispers stopped, plunging the clearing into an eerie silence. An unsettling calm enveloped us, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I slowly opened the box, heart pounding. Inside, a handful of items lay nestled among the dirt. A tarnished locket, a cracked mirror, and something that looked like hair. I took a deep breath, dread washing over me. What if this belongs to whoever or whatever is out there? Before Jake could respond, I heard a soft rustle behind us. My heart dropped. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The sound of rustling leaves grew louder, and I felt the cold grip of fear settling in my stomach. I peered into the darkness, squinting to catch a glimpse of what lurked just beyond the fringe of the trees. "Mia?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. I could hear the slight shake in his tone, mirroring the panic that roared inside me. Then I saw it. A figure, just out of reach of the moonlight, stood among the trees. It was tall and unnaturally still, cloaked in shadows that seemed to cling to it like a second skin. I instinctively squeezed the box tight in my grip, as if it could protect me from whatever was out there. We both froze. The whispers returned, low and haunting. "Mia, come home." They echoed through the clearing, wrapping around us, filling my head with dread. I didn't want to move, but Jake pulled at my arm, urging me to stay silent. "Let's go. Now," he hissed, inching backward. I nodded, barely able to tear my gaze away from the dark figure. As we slowly retreated, my foot caught on a root, sending me stumbling into Jake. We both fell, landing hard against the damp earth. I winced, but the pain was soon overshadowed by pure terror. The figure shifted, now stepping closer. "Mia," it whispered again, its voice chillingly familiar. I could almost recognize it, but panic fogged my mind. "Run!" Jake shouted, and we scrambled to our feet, racing through the clearing and back toward the narrow path. Each step felt like a lifetime, and I could hear the whispers growing louder behind us, a storm of voices sweeping through the trees. "Mia, come home!" It taunted me, pulling at threads of my mind I didn't want to unravel. We barreled deeper into the woods, branches clawing at my skin, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. I tried not to think about what lay behind us. I focused on the space ahead, hoping to find an escape. "Keep going," Jake urged, but he was breathing heavily now too. I could sense his fear pressing down on me. I wasn't the only one terrified. Suddenly, the path ahead opened into a small ravine. A swift creek bubbled below, cutting through the forest as if carving it apart. "We can't go back," Jake gasped, stopping at the edge. "We have to cross." "Are you crazy?" I looked down. The water rushed below, cold and dark. "We'll drown!" But the whispers grew louder, panic twisting through my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling of being pursued. That figure was still out there, waiting, watching. Jake grabbed my hand and pulled me closer to the water. "It's our only chance," he said, desperation coloring his words. "We'll jump together." Just as I opened my mouth to protest, I heard it, a crack, a branch breaking close behind us. Jake's eyes widened in alarm. "Now!" We jumped together, hitting the cold water with a splash. It bit into my skin, the shock expanding through my body. For a moment all I could do was struggle against the current, gasping for breath. Then the whispers fell silent. Dread crawled up my spine as I turned my head back toward the shore. The figure stood at the water's edge, but it was no longer alone. More shapes emerged from the trees, their outlines indistinct, but growing clearer against the moonlight. "Mia!" they called in unison, their voices harmonious and haunting. I felt Jake's grip on my arm slip as I looked back at him, the reality of our situation crashing down around us. "We need to swim," I cried. But as I started moving, I realized they weren't just following us. They were waiting. Before I could comprehend what was happening, the darkness surged around, and the last thing I saw was their faces, twisted and familiar, a mirror to my own. Then everything went dark. I gasped, my lungs burning as I surged to the surface, spluttering water. Light pierced through the shadow, and I blinked against the pain that throbbed in my head. I was alive, but where was Jake? Panic surged through me as I scrambled to orient myself. I caught sight of him just a few feet away, still struggling against the current. I reached out, my hand grazing his, as he pulled himself up onto a slick rock. "Mia!" he coughed, water spraying from his mouth. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I yelled back, even though my heart raced with uncertainty. The sounds that filled the air were disorienting. The whispers had vanished, but a heavy silence pressed down on me, thick with suspense. "We need to get out of the water," Jake said, glancing back toward the shore. They're coming." I turned just in time to see the shapes shift along the bank, their silhouettes writhing in the moonlight. My stomach twisted. They were no longer just vague figures. I could make out the details, familiar faces twisted in expressions I never wanted to see again. "Mia," they whispered again, but this time there was something deeper, an echo of love mixed with malice. It slowed my heartbeat, threatening to bring forth memories I had desperately tried to bury. I stumbled backward, searching for an escape route on the other side of the creek. "We can't let them catch us," Jake looked at me, eyes wide and determined. The path should be over there, through the trees. He shoved away from the rock, barely managing to keep his footing. Together we scrambled toward the forest's edge, each movement a desperate bid to break free from whatever torment pursued us. Once we were safely on the bank, we turned, hoping to put distance between us and the shapes. I dared to glance back, and the air choked in my throat. They stood watching us, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like dark, hollow pools. It was like looking into an abyss I couldn't escape. "What do we do now?" Jake gasped, fighting to catch his breath. "We need to find that cabin," I said, the words tumbling out before I could think. I remembered the old stories my grandmother told me, tales of people who sought refuge in a nearby cabin when they ventured too far into the woods. "Do you think it's real?" Jake asked, scanning the tree line, still shaken. "There's only one way to find out." We pressed onward, the forest thickening around us. Every snap of a twig sent jolts of terror racing through me. I wasn't just afraid of the figures back there. I was terrified of the memories that clung to me like shadows. "There!" I pointed to a silhouette in the distance, breaking the oppressive canopy above. My heart sank and lifted all at once. The cabin loomed ahead, its outline barely discernible against the night sky. It was old and abandoned, but it might be our only chance. Just as we approached, the whispers returned. "Mia, come home." They swirled in the air around us, thick and tormenting. I turned to Jake, my face stricken with fear. "We need to go inside now!" We raced toward the cabin's door, but before we could reach it, a chilling realization gripped me. The whispers weren't just distant voices, they were growing closer. "Let's hurry!" I shouted, but that's when I saw it. A shadow moved beside the doorframe, slipping through the darkness. "Someone's in there!" Panic clutched my throat as I fumbled for the doorknob, knowing that whatever waited for us inside was just as dangerous as what chased us outside. But the figures were closing in. We had no choice. I twisted the knob and pushed the door open. An icy gust greeted us as I stepped inside, fear flooding my senses. Then I heard it. Footsteps behind us. The door creaked as it swung inward, sending a cloud of musty air swirling around us. I crossed the threshold first, my heart pounding. "Jake, come on," I urged, glancing over my shoulder. He hesitated for just a moment, eyes darting toward the darkness just outside. "What if they—" "Now!" I hissed. He stepped inside, and I slammed the door behind him. We stood in a dimly lit room, the only illumination coming from a small, cracked window. Dust motes danced in the feeble light, and the air felt cold, almost stagnant. The floorboards were worn and creaked under our weight. I could feel the presence of something or someone lurking just beyond our sight. "What do we do?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. I pressed my back against the door, listening. The whispers outside grew louder, almost drowning out our voices. "We need to find a place to hide," I said. "Here?" Jake looked around, scanning the room. There was a fireplace choked with ashes and a rickety old table laden with broken chairs. The cabin appeared abandoned, yet something didn't sit right. Before I could respond, a faint sound came from the corner, a scrape of wood against wood. I turned to see a closet, the door slightly ajar. "In there!" Jake didn't need to be told twice. We hurried across the room, the whispers now mingling with distant thumps, like something heavy crashing against the cabin walls. I pushed the closet door open, cringing at the creak, and we squeezed inside. The closet was dark, musty, and cramped. I pulled the door mostly closed, leaving a small crack to see out. I could feel Jake's breath quickening beside me. "What if they find us?" he asked, barely audible. I listened hard, trying to gauge the footsteps. They were everywhere now, circling the cabin, their low murmurs like a chant. "You have to calm down," I whispered, glancing at him. "They can't see us here." But as the whispers faded momentarily, I heard something else. A familiar laughter echoing from outside, one that froze my blood. It was a sound I had once cherished, now twisted into something dark and haunting. "Mia, please come play." I pressed my hands to my ears, desperate to block it out. Jake shot me a panicked look, and I could only shake my head. I didn't want to hear it, didn't want to think about how they knew my name. Then the sounds shifted suddenly, a heavy thud against the door. My heart dropped. They weren't just whispering anymore, they were trying to get inside. "What now?" Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. The thuds grew louder, like fists battering against the wood. I felt the closet tremble around us. I had to act. On 3, we pushed the door open and run for it. "Got it?" "What? Are you crazy? We can't—" "Trust me," I shot back, nerves electrifying my words. 1, 2. Before I could say 3, the door crashed inward. The old wood splintered, and the figure that stepped through was one I recognized too well. It was a face I'd dreamed about, a memory that clawed at my sanity. "Time to come home, Mia." I recoiled, terror seizing me. The shadow loomed larger, an echo of a past I longed to escape, and then everything went black. I awoke to a harsh, cold light piercing through my eyelids. Blinking rapidly, I tried to focus, but my mind felt foggy. When I managed to sit up, I noticed I was on the floor of the cabin. The closet door was wide open, and Jake was frantically shaking me. "Mia, are you okay?" His voice was laced with panic. I looked around. We were still in the cabin, but everything felt off. The air was thick with an acrid smell, like something had burned. Shadows shifted in the corners of the room, and the laughter lingered in my ears, twisted and mocking. Did we just lose consciousness?" I asked, my throat dry. "Yeah, I think so," Jake said, glancing nervously toward the open door. "I don't know what happened. One moment we were about to run, and then, I know." Panic began to rise again, threatening to drown me. "That thing, it said my name." I know." He looked down, his expression stricken. "And it felt like a trap. We have to get out of here." Just as he spoke, I heard it again, the soft crackle of movement from outside the cabin. Our eyes locked. There was something out there, lurking just beyond the door. I rose to my feet, the wood groaning under my weight. "We need to find another way out." I glanced toward a window at the far end of the room, broken but offering an escape. "Are you sure?" Jake asked, biting his lip. "No choice." I took a deep breath and made my way toward the window, ignoring the shivers creeping up my spine. As I got closer, the whispers intensified, taking on a deeper, more threatening tone. "Mia, come home. Mia." I felt a surge of dread wash over me. The voice was familiar but distorted, tainted. I turned back to Jake. "We can't stay here." He nodded, but as we reached the window, a violent shudder ran through the cabin. What was that? "It's them, isn't it?" At that moment, the window shattered, exploding into sharp fragments. A dark figure lunged through the opening, a violent blur that knocked me back against the wall. Everything happened so fast. Jake screamed, pushing me away from the explosion of glass, and I ducked just in time. The figure staggered back, blood painting the splintered frame. I finally got a good look at it, a strange intertwining of shadows and familiar faces, their features shifting like mist. It was fear incarnate, and it reached for us. "Stay with us, Mia." "No!" I shouted, pushing Jake ahead of me. We bolted toward the door, the whispers crescendoing into a deafening roar. Every instinct told me to run, to evade whatever horror waited behind us. But as I reached for the door, it swung open on its own, and another figure stood silhouetted against the fading light. The resemblance was impossible. A woman, looking just like me, but twisted and wrong. "Mia," she said, her voice a chilling echo of my own, "where do you think you're going?" My heart raced. "Run!" I shouted to Jake, but it was already too late. I felt a strong grip on my wrist as the shadows closed in, suffocating the space around us. All hope of escape vanished in an instant. And in that moment I realized, whatever had followed us, it didn't intend to let us go. When I finally opened my eyes again, it was to the oppressive weight of darkness. I could feel the dampness of the floor beneath me and the chill that hung in the air. The cabin was silent now, eerily so. I pushed myself up, heart pounding as I scanned the room. The last thing I remembered was the shadow that had lunged at us, the feeling of being pulled into something dark and familiar. "Jake!" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. I waited, desperately hoping to hear his voice in return. Nothing happened. I blinked several times, trying to adjust to this personal twilight. Were we safe now, or had something taken us down a darker path? I pushed myself to my feet, narrowly avoiding the shards of glass scattered on the floor. As I glanced at the shattered window, a deep pit of dread pooled in my stomach. I knew I needed to get out, but wasn't sure where Jake was or what had happened to us. That thing, my doppelganger, had been so close. I cursed under my breath, trying to shake the feeling of dread that settled heavily on my shoulders. Looking toward the door, I hesitated. I didn't want to face whatever shadows haunted me outside, but I couldn't stay here either. With a deep breath, I gripped the doorknob, feeling a rush of cold air as I opened it. I stepped outside, heart in my throat, half expecting to see that twisted figure looming close behind me. The night was still, unnaturally so. "Jake!" I called again, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. I stepped cautiously down the porch, scanning the surrounding woods. The darkness was thick, and I could feel the weight of something watching from the depths of the forest. Just as I began to turn back, a noise broke the silence, a low whispering that turned my blood to ice. "Mia!" The voices danced on the wind. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, terrified but unyielding. I couldn't let them take me again, whatever they were. I sprinted into the trees, desperate to put distance between them and me. The world blurred as I rushed between the trunks, my breath echoing in the void. "Jake, where are you?" I yelled again, feeling my voice shatter against the trees like glass. As I plunged deeper, the air grew heavy with tension. I stumbled over roots, the whispering winding around me like a coil. Then I heard a thud behind me, heavy footfalls tracking my every move. I turned to face whatever pursued me, caught between the need to run and the instinct to confront. The shadows had shifted, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a flicker of a familiar silhouette among the trees. "Jake!" I called again, forcing myself to keep moving. A gust of wind rustled the leaves, stirring up the whispers. They were growing louder, swirling into a chaotic chorus of voices. I pressed ahead, my heart racing. The tension was wrapping around me like a noose. Suddenly a figure burst from the underbrush, and I screeched to a halt. It was Jake, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. "Mia!" he breathed, relief flooding his features. "What happened?" I gasped, grabbing his shoulders. "We need to get out of here." "I don't know, it was like I was—" His voice trailed off as he glanced back into the darkness. "It wanted us both. I was in the cabin, and then I was lost. I heard you call my name." The whispers crescendoed, their voices thickening the air around us, reviving our memories. We needed to escape, but the trees felt like they were closing in, each shadow stretching closer, threatening to snatch us away. "Come on!" I urged, pulling him toward a narrow path I noticed earlier. The figures were gathering, malevolent eyes glinting in the dark. We bolted, haphazardly navigating through the twisted branches and crumbling leaves beneath our feet. We rounded a corner, and my breath hitched. A long-abandoned stone well sat looming before us, its depths shrouded in darkness. The whispers paused, almost as if they were debating among themselves, causing the air to vibrate. "Should we go down?" Jake asked, panic creeping into his eyes. I didn't know. A part of me felt an odd pull toward it, like it held some kind of answer. I don't know," I stammered. "We can't let them catch us. But what if something waits down there?" Before I could grasp what was truly happening, the figures around the well surged forward. Shades of the past blocked our path. The whispers returned, echoing, blended with the laughter of memories long gone. "Mia, come home!" "No!" I shouted back, the defiance emerging from a place deep within. "You don't own me!" With that, I grabbed Jake's hand and leaped toward the well's edge. As we plummeted into the darkness, the world turned to chaos, the whispers mingling with the rushing wind and the cold touch of stone. I held onto Jake tightly, bracing for impact. I don't know what happened next. The sensation of falling was real and intoxicating, but then came the darkness. I could feel it wrapping around me, holding me tight as everything blurred out of focus. When I came to, we were back in the cabin. But the air felt different. The whispers were no longer taunting us, but merely humming, a gentle song echoing between the walls. I looked around, unsure if we had truly escaped, but as I turned to Jake, uncertainty coiling in my gut, I realized my brother had vanished. "Jake!" I called out, but the silence answered back. It seemed the song of the cabin had merely lulled me into a state of calm, but the questions remained. Where had we gone? Was this truly our escape, or had I stepped into another trap? Still, deep down, I knew one thing. Whatever that darkness was, it would always hold a piece of me. Even as I stepped into the dim light of a new dawn, the scars of the encounter lingered on, bleeding into the silence of the woods.